The one thing the 49ers have not had to deal with yet, and we won't know this until probably the end of this year, definitely within the next couple of years. And this is what I think really speaks to Andy, obviously Belichick. Uh, when you lose coaches, and I'm talking stalwarts, right? Because Kyle's the play caller, but he goes out of his way about LaFleur's brother and Mike McDaniels. They play enormous roles on the game plan. I mean, there'll be plays in the game that he'll say after. It's like, oh yeah, Mike, Mike did that. Or LaFleur saw this with Jimmy on Saturday night. Like that, they play a massive fucking. Those guys are not going to be here forever.
Right.
I think there is a very, very good chance they're both gone at the end of this year. I think when you say it's a borderline lock, one of them is gone, and his defensive coordinator, which at the end of the day, you go, well, Kyle's hired now 2 LaFleurs. He can cultivate another McVay, McDaniels. Like I have confidence that he'll find that type guy, and that type guy, whoever the top one is at Alabama or a young guy for Andy or Sean Payton, should want to come to Kyle. Like I feel confident there. But the hard thing is, and we've seen this with Sean McVay's going through it for the first time now, but we've seen it for a long time with Sean Payton, who's gone through a lot of defensive coordinators. Remember, kill the head, the body will die. They had to fire him. Then the Rex Ryan. Now he's got Dennis Allen. You've seen it with Andy Reid, Jim Johnson. Jim Johnson gets sick. He has to go Sean McDermott. Then he goes Juan Castillo, Bob Sutton, and now what's his name? Spagnuolo. So who will be his next defensive coordinator? Like that, you could argue that. Would that be his biggest hire? Probably even more than the offensive guys. Be just your confidence that he's going to know what to look for in offensive guys. Just that's his baby. Like look at the guys he's hired.
Yeah, and I think some of that is like they are in part their job is to do for him what he teaches them to do for him.
Yeah.
Right. No, and again, like you said, Mike LaFleur or Mike McDaniel. When Robert Saleh gets a head coaching job, it makes a lot of sense that one of those guys would be Robert Saleh's OC. Now, we don't know. Maybe Robert's got some other guy he likes, but why wouldn't you?
Wouldn't you think part of the package of Robert Saleh getting an OC is like, I'm taking Kyle's right-hand guy. Right?
And we're going to get a guy that we might have to replace him in a year or two because he might become a head coach really quickly. But
because if I said
one of
John
these two guys might get a head coaching job from the job they have now without becoming an OC.
What would you say? John Guy, do a project. Let's assume Robert Saleh gets a head coaching job. Who is the Niners' next defensive coordinator? What would we do? We would look at the Pete Carroll tree and the guys throughout the country in the NFL that have run that defense because clearly he likes that defense. But who would he hire? I don't know. Like if Dan Quinn gets fired in Atlanta, would Dan Quinn be a lock to be his defensive coordinator? I'd say I don't know.
No, that could be a little weird.
That could be a little weird.
Yeah.
But that's sometimes how it works.
No, I mean, but you're right. When you have success, just let's look at who's had success and what the challenges for those people are. You mentioned Andy's. I mentioned Pete's. I mean, there are some basic things. You lose coaches. Your players get expensive, so your drafts become critically important. Like, it's not an accident. The Seahawks have had a lot of success. They've drafted later and later. Their GMs become more and more important because their draft picks have become more and more necessary to hit on. Now, the Niners, the one thing you'd say for them is they've nailed some picks. They've already had some misses to this point, and they've overcome those misses. But the better you are, the more expensive you get, the more your draft picks are going to matter. The harder they are to nail because they're later, so you're scouting. Like, all that stuff matters a lot. I think the other thing, like I've asked you, we were talking about this before the podcast, like, all right, is Kyle the face? Well, is Sean Payton the face? Co-face. Is Bill Belichick the face? Was he with Tom? Co-face. Is Pete Carroll the face of the Seahawks? Co-face. Like, obviously the Chiefs now, Andy is probably Pat Mahomes' co-face, but it's only because Pat is just a super rocket. But they've got Jimmy.
I'd say the only true co-face, though, Guy, for as great as Sean Payton was, I'd say Drew Brees the face of the Saints. And for as great as Pete Carroll really has been, I think Russell has just kind of surpassed. I think Brady and Belichick would be the only true ones where you go, yeah, Belichick just can't get any more. Like, he's as famous as it gets.
So if we're gonna really kind of nail down, I'd say Kyle is more the face of the 49ers than Jimmy Garoppolo.
I would 1,000% agree with that statement. I'd say Kyle Shanahan is currently the face of the San Francisco 49ers. Where I would say, you're right, Pat Mahomes is past Andy. Sean McVay is probably still the face right now of the Rams, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
So, like, when I think the Saints, I would imagine if we just walk down the street, most people would just say Drew Brees. I think most people would say Russell Wilson. Yeah. Where you could say the Patriots and be like, God, Belichick, man, he's crazy. You know, Belichick and Brady were kind of synonymous with each other. So it's not a bad thing, right? It just I do think, though, it speaks to if they're going to sustain success. Like when you look at Andy's resume with Philly, and I think he was kind of the face with the Eagles. Donovan was still probably went to, if we Wikipedia'd him, probably 5-6 Pro Bowls. Like, you're going to need Jimmy, and this should happen eventually if you just keep winning. And we've been saying this for a while on other videos and podcasts. Like, there is some pressure on Jimmy to start going to some Pro Bowls. Like, he's going to have to be really, really good. Even if he just has like a Tony Romo type run of like 4 Pro Bowls, but clearly viewed as one of the best quarterbacks in his conference, then I'd go, yeah, the Niners, if Jimmy starts going to Pro Bowls, they're rattling off 11, 12 win seasons for the next half decade. If you told me he goes to 4 Pro Bowls the next 6 years, I go, yeah, I'd say minimum they're in multiple NFC championship games, right? Because that means if he's that good, they're just going to be winning.
Yeah, or at least they're just, some of these moments are just moments that are out of your hands. But yeah, they are NFC championship, Super Bowl level teams for all those years.
Because they're definitely going to, one thing is there are going to definitely be years. And Andy's had this, Sean Payton's had this, and even Belichick's had this, where your defense isn't that good, right? You just either injuries, either the way you've built your team, you got to hope a draft pick hits and he doesn't. So your defense, middle of the pack, 18th instead of like 4th, right? So your offense just got to carry the day. And that's where I think Kyle comes in. He can out-coach you. He can out-scheme you. He can just figure things out. And he's just got a chance to be an all-time great. But they're going to, that's just for him to become an all-time great. He's going to have to coach other coaches, teams that are one-sided. And he's just, what's fun about this is I think it's like a shooting star and headed to the moon, but you got to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. No, it was the battle we had when we did the video about, is he a top 5 coach? It's like, well, it's you just how after 3 years can you put his resume up with some of these other guys? At the same time, if there were a coach draft right now, I think he's a top 5 pick lock, shoe-in, maybe top 3. And we made the argument on the video yesterday. Maybe you could argue if you factor in age, which why wouldn't you? If it's a real draft, could he go number 1? Now that's a whole other debate, but I do think, like, if we listed the things, what are the things that could slow you down, derail you? I think any coach 3 years in who's had a lot of success, and you would have said this with Harbaugh too, right, is, and you'd probably say it with the Ravens right now. That's not really a John Harbaugh. It's probably more a Greg Roman thing. But what happens when the league adjusts to you? How do you adjust back? That's the conversation with Sean McVay, even though we're both big Sean McVay fans. We think he'll be fine, but is he going to be back to Super Bowl contender every year? We'll see. That's where we go back to what we said about Kyle constantly, is like the guy's been an offensive coordinator since 2008. So the league has had plenty of time to adjust to Kyle Shanahan, and he's had plenty of time to see what the league's doing to his offenses and adjust back. So there's not some big secret out there that everyone learned, the secret sauce that Kyle's been sprinkling in and now the tape's out. Like, it's been out. So that's one thing that I would put aside. Like, that is not an
probably the one.
It'd
probably be the reason. Probably the reason to be bullish also then on Harbaugh and Roman, just because Roman's been down this road before, so he knows kind of what's coming, right, and what didn't work the last time.
Yeah, but Roman has not been in year 7 of after it was good for 3 years. Then what? Right? We haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, but I mean, he failed with Kaepernick that 4th year. So now he's had a couple years of success with Lamar. He knows probably what they're going to do to slow down Lamar. True. Like, he knows what you need to adapt to. At least they can have the conversation like, when you and my brother, what went wrong in 2014? What do you have to do here? Just like Kyle can have, listen, once they start taking this away, I know we got this. Kyle's offense and Roman's, you'd say, well, the red flag is it is kind of a niche offense.
But I think Kyle's he's got a better passer than he had last time.
Who, Lamar, right now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you think. I mean, he can put up some bigger numbers sometimes, but I think Kaepernick had a better arm. Yeah, it's just part of it is their run game is so dominant. He's just getting guys wide open, kind of collegiate style. And as we know, that's not always works. Like the one thing about Kyle's offense, why it's really sustainable, we've seen it work for like 7 different franchises for 20 plus years because it always has a pitch. Well, it's like, oh, I think they're going to run right, and then he goes naked bootleg, and then you think you're going to run left, and then he runs a throwback, and then he just hits a normal pass, and they just run the ball. It's just a pretty. I think the offense overall is just built for the long haul. Right? It's not. It's like not that. There's nothing really cute about it. Right? It's just a solid. It can do everything. It can go deep. It can go short. It can throw intermediate. It can use the running back. It can use the fullback. It really uses every position. That's what you feel.
But one of the keys to it is it's like it's a car with a lot of cool buttons on it. But you have to have someone who understands where to use the buttons, how to use the buttons. Like,
yeah,
right. The key to the whole thing being great is that Kyle Shanahan just has an incredible feel for play calling. The other thing, if we're talking about like what could derail, changes in we talk about changes in coaching, changes in the front office might be another thing over time. That doesn't necessarily mean John Lynch. What if Adam Peters goes and becomes a general manager somewhere else? What if in 3 years John Lynch is like, this was fun, I'm ready to go back to TV? I don't know that that'll happen. Barrows wrote that John Lynch is making way more than Kyle relative to the other GM, so he's not in need of an extension or a raise like Kyle was. And
I was told he got over $4 million when he first signed, so he got like $25 million contract, which most general managers, I think, make like 1.5.
And the other thing that Barrows wrote
Joe Douglas got huge money last year. Remember when the Jets were kind of desperate and took him? Got a little over 3. So think about, and that was massive cash. And John makes more than him.
So he's not in a need. There's no question about whether or not the organization loves him because they paid Kyle. Kyle already was in charge, so it's not. This doesn't change the dynamic. The other thing Barrows wrote though is there's a couple other contracts coming up soon, like Schneider and Mickey Loomis, and that John Lynch can wait and watch those guys get paid. But
do you think? And we've talked about this before. John Lynch currently, as we record this, quadruple more important now to a TV network than he was before, and he was already a borderline Hall of Famer. Like just what he has now, just for a casual football fan, being a general manager and working with Kyle Shanahan.
Yeah, I mean, if he now goes back and becomes the number one candidate for
like would ESPN try to hire him for Monday Night Football?
Yeah, or Fox's biggest broadcast. It's hard because you got Troy, but the point is he could be your number one. He could be your Monday Night.
Collinsworth quit. NBC could hire him. He could. Yeah.
And he could have worked his way there anyway, but now, but again, it's like he just might. This is a pretty good job for him.
The one thing though I've heard about him is that he doesn't approach this like some 8 to 5. Like he does work really hard. Now I would imagine if you just follow John Lynch, if you just had like a hour-long montage of the last 20 years of his life, like not too many naps on the couch, on Saturdays. Like the guy is a grinder. So the way he probably approached television, the way he approaches being a dad, the way he approached playing football, the way he approaches, he's just a full foot to the pedal, red line and kind of it's just to him, he's like, yeah, well, I'm the general manager. What do you think? I'm going to show up at 9?
But if he approaches TV that way, as long as his relationship with Kyle is great, how much better is just being in the fight?
Well, for him, I think it's a lot better because I hated it because I hated the feeling of not being able to control anything. Clearly, when you've used to always being in the fight and the gladiator, you clearly miss it, And there's something that just draws those guys back. I mean, hell, Gruden was gone for 10 years, and it feels like, God, he's fucking loving this shit again, Even though it's like there's something in these guys and these GMs and guy Mayock. Think how crazy that is. Like, Mike, what are you doing? You had one of the best jobs in America, but he needed the juice, and he hadn't played in 30 years. And John really had just retired when, like 06 or 07. Like he'd been gone basically a decade. And it feels like he just, he's pacing up there when the calls are going. He's screaming like call timeout. Like
sidelines.
Yeah, it's just in his DNA. It's just part of who you are. And I wouldn't be shocked. To me, he's much more of a wild card. Like to me, Kyle's coaching football. He's just too good. Like if you're Mozart, you don't just stop playing. Like to me, John, if you told me in a couple years he goes back to TV or he did something with his kid, or maybe just retires. Like I think he's probably a little bit more of a wild card, a little like Steve Kerr.
Yeah, but I'd have a hard time
anything
seeing. But to me, Steve Kerr's not coaching another basketball team. I'd have a hard time seeing John Lynch going, it's time for me to take over my own operation and be in charge.
Yeah,
Right?
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'd see like Steve. I could see him just like, yeah, I'm just gonna go back to San Diego and hang out. But I do think probably just like Steve, they do like being in the fight more than they kind of come off like they do in just their interviews. Now, John probably does more than Steve, though because we know John's kind of crazy in the sense of just talking about players or whatever. Like Steve feels a little bit more just all these interests, but clearly, like when you hear him talk, like he's actually more Draymond than you think. And I think John parallels that a lot too. Like John's kind of a Draymond too, and that's what he'd probably tell you is for as great as TV was, and he loved working with Kevin Burkhardt and being a part of Fox. It's probably pretty hollow for him, right? Making $1 million, you're like, I don't even feel like I'm doing that much. It's great money, and it's like it pays for my golf membership and my sweet house. But God, I just feel, for me, I'd be the opposite. I'd be like, I'm hogging shit right now, just rolling over. I couldn't be any happier.
So you're saying I can make 3 times as much, but I have to work 25 times as hard,
and have people just shitting on me nonstop.
Though it hasn't happened much to him.
But he got. I mean, I wouldn't say. Yeah, I'd say it was pretty critical the first couple of years.
I mean,
question mark.
But I wouldn't say it's been shitting on him nonstop, right?
But I'd also say this is the difference between like the 49ers and probably like the Eagles or the Giants or something. It is a little bit of an easier landing strip out here for that job.
Yeah, and the Niners needed saving.
And the bar was low.
Things were bad.
Bar was really low.
Yeah.
Think how fast just they've pivoted from that Solomon Thomas Reuben Foster draft. Right? That happened. Their first draft that at the time, Peter King wrote that article on Monday after the Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It was like they're wheeling and dealing. Mm-hmm. They got Solomon Thomas, they get Reuben Foster.
Traded back
3 years later.
Right, that was part of the Thomas thing.
Solomon didn't get his 5th-year option pick up. He's not going to be back on this team after this year. And Reuben Foster got cut after he got arrested at a hotel with the team on a road game, which again, it's never happened in my knowledge, and I'll be hard pressed to ever see that happen again. It's borderline impossible, guy. Like you're there for 12 hours in meetings and then eat and sleep. You're right. That could have been a defining type moment. It kind of was at the time. It was insane. I remember reading that tweet. Like Reuben Foster has been arrested. You're like, aren't they at the team hotel? And they pivoted so fast. It kind of feels like they've never really looked back after that moment. In a weird way.
I think that is an important point, that it's not that it's been perfect. It hasn't been perfect.
Far from perfect.
They've had to recover from misses. Now, they did draft George Kittle in that draft in the 5th round. So
no, I know.
No, I know you do. I'm just saying, like, it turned out they did in some ways. They didn't win that draft, but they nailed it. We just didn't realize in what way they did until later, because they ended up getting a guy that is a first-round talent.
Well, I'll give you another moment. Were you at training camp the day that Navarro Bowman retired as a Niner?
I was there when he came. We were there when he came back.
Yeah. Like with Drew Rosenhaus stuff on the field. Then he gave the press conference or whatever.
Yeah. He was there with his family that day.
Remember the first year, like 3 or 4 games into the season, it was like, bro, you're not going to play anymore. We cut you. They cut Navarro Bowman, and clearly Navarro was not happy. It was, pretty ugly. And then just a couple years later, now again, emotions are high, but still, I think it kind of speaks to just, if you're Jed, you're like, God, these guys can just handle some weird situations, and they're likable. Because Navarro that day is hugging everybody, and you go 1, 2, 3, go Niners, and Kyle's hitting him on the spot. It felt like, God, Navarro wants to kill Kyle. And that sure flipped fast. Then he became a Raider, and kind of crazy.
As it turned out,
it was over. They were right.
Kyle, right? It was just, he was right.
I just think it's hard sometimes with famous players, with new coaches. It can be ugly. It often is, because you have to make big decisions on these big names where at the time, what would every 49er, Navarro Bowman or Kyle Shanahan? You'd be like, Navarro's my guy, right?
Well,
of course he is.
This goes back to what you said earlier, where the situation he came into, the leeway that he got, the rope that he got, 6-year contract, whatever you need, it's your operation. We're hands off. We're not going to tell you got to keep famous guys around. because we got their picture hanging on the stadium. Just whatever you got to do. Maybe it's harder in other situations if you aren't given that from the jump. The Niners, Jet understood, like, we just got to let them do everything. We can't fight them on anything here.
It is hard.
There's been no leak. That's the other thing. Leak free.
Yeah. It's really hard, I just think, in general in pro sports because of just how public the job is. So it's easy to be like, I'm giving these guys 4 or 5 years. And then you're just like, I can't imagine being the owner and every day opening up Twitter, open up the newspaper, or now the Athletic, or, just flipping on ESPN. And if you're a major brand, them shitting on you, you're like, that it'd be hard to quote unquote tune out the news as the owner. It's easier as the coach or the GM because you can just blinders on, live in the bubble. As the owner, you're like, well, I don't really have. What am I going to do? Play golf this afternoon? Like, what else am I doing?
VC
fly
meetings.
Somewhere? Yeah, maybe buy. Let's buy another MLS minor league team.